back to St. Petersburg in 1991. So when he was in Petrograd, he met my grandmother, who was a Lithuanian domestic called Alexandra Polinovska, and they married in St. Petersburg, or Petrograd as it was, and my father was born there in 1920. However, it wasn't a great time to be in 1920. The First World War had finished, the Russians had left early, and they were in complete turmoil in their own country, you know, with the revolution and one thing and another. But Poland, after the First World War, was re-established. So by the end of the war, the Germans had actually dominated quite an area, but during the Treaty of Versailles and the reparations, they were actually, it was taken off them, and a Poland was re-established in the centre of Europe once more, with a slightly different bit of land than it had before. The problem was, as it goes through, that they were given a strip of land up to the Baltic Sea, which actually separated the German heartland of East Prussia from the rest of Germany. So that was a problem. The eastern border was another big problem because there was no government in Russia that they could properly negotiate with. It was always in conflict along this eastern border, and there was often Russian incursions into the Polish territory. And by the beginning of the 1930s, this is what it looked like. The new Poland had become this area with my dad's village. You can see 100 kilometres to the east of Vilno or Vilnius. And Poland's history continued to be turbulent. They had disputes up here and around here, and this area was always under permanent conflict. And they established what they called the Border Protection Force to look after that area. So it's a sort of an army within an army. And the Russians did invade and marched on Warsaw, and were repelled in 1920 in what was known as the Miracle of the Vistula. My dad's village, though, near Vilno, was in what was then the Polish Lake District. It was a region of massive, clear, beautiful Polish lakes. This was the main one, Lake Naroch. And my dad's village was here. I can't read it from where I am, but it actually is called Szwakty. It's a tiny little village called Szwakty, just near to this beautiful Lake Naroch and near to Lake Szwakty up there as well. But it's a region full of forest, marshlands, and beautiful big clear lakes. And it was an area with, it was predominantly Polish, although there were some Belarusians and some Russians, and there was also Jews, Tartars and things like that. My dad, as I say, was born in 1920. With all the problems in Russia, his father moved back to Szwakty around about 1921. And after some rudimentary education, my dad trained to be a tailor in the nearby town of Kobylnik. His village was incredibly poor, and this is a photograph of the house that my dad was brought up in that village of Szwakty. He had 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and this is one of my dad's sisters, probably around the late 1920s or early 1930s. But that is the actual house that my dad was brought up in. Sadly, one of his sisters died in an accident, and this gruesome picture is taken at the Kobylnik Catholic Church. This is my grandfather, Vincent Pleszak, my grandmother, Alexandra, 2 of me aunties, 1 of my uncles, and this is my father when he was in his early teens, so the earliest picture we've got of my father. Poland struggled through the 1930s with all the troubles that was going on with the threat from Germany. So by the beginning of August 1939, Poland and Europe looked like this, but we all know what happened on the 1st of September 1939. The Germans invaded from the west, but they only invaded half of Poland. You know, it was a massive, it was the Blitzkrieg. They came in from the west and from the north and moved to what was known as the Curzon line, which separated Poland. Just over 2 weeks later, in a little known bit of significant history, without any warning whatsoever, the Russians, the Soviet Red Army, invaded from the east. And the Polish army and the Polish civilians were completely unprepared for this. Eventually, those that could, of the military and the government and things like that, a few escaped through the Baltics and eventually ended up in England. The majority that could escaped through Romania and then on to France, where Poland historically had its best relationship. Culturally, educationally, militarily, their relationship was with France, not England. A few more, though, escaped to Syria, where they formed an independent rifle brigade that fought in the North African campaigns as well. When France eventually fell, those that could escaped to England. France expected Poland to actually capitulate with them, but there was none of that. They'd actually fought with their armies, with the navy, with their air force, but those that could arrived in England, where the government in exile that had been formed under General Sikorski in France set up its headquarters in London, and their embassy remained there until the last non-communist Polish government, which was in 1991 when it moved back to Poland. But their old embassy is still there and is now known as the Polish Institute and Sikorski Museum. And a fantastic place it is too. When the Russians invaded, obviously the Polish army fought against them. Those that could escaped, but those that didn't were captured. Of those that were captured, the officers were all segregated into special camps. Then in the civilian areas, in parallels of what has happened quite recently in Ukraine, is there were sham elections where they were completely Sovietizing, is that the right word? They were completely Sovietizing the Poland, and there was plans to incorporate the eastern region of Poland, which is known as Kresy, the Kresy region of Poland, whereby the northern section of the Kresy was due to go into the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic, and the southern section of the Kresy was going to be incorporated into the Ukraine Soviet Socialist Republic. Polish language was banned, Polish books were destroyed, the money became not usable, and the use of Polish language was forbidden. It was horrible. And this is a handwritten letter from a member of the Pleszak family in Szwakty explaining what had happened. I'm not going to go into this, but basically it says that they had a candidate imposed on them as a village elder. It was somebody from outside the area, had no knowledge of the village, was a communist and not even Polish. And they were given a ballot paper with one name on it, with their name on it, and they were expected either to leave it if they accepted the name or cross it out. Everybody had to vote. Even those that were ill or sick were dragged out of their homes, they had to vote. The previous village elder reported that after the election, about 75% of the name or ballot papers had the names crossed out. But what do you expect? The candidate that was imposed on them was actually voted in with a better than 95% majority. So make of it what you will. And the area became then part of the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. So again, Poland had disappeared from the map. Similarly in the south, it became part of the Ukraine Soviet Socialist Republic. Then there was a series of mass arrests. After the Red Army moved in, they were quickly followed by what were known as the NKVD. The NKVD were the predecessors to what we know as the KGB, the Russian secret police. And they rounded up any agitators or anybody that was against them, often for no apparent reason. And there were mass arrests of people all over. My dad was one of those that was arrested by the NKVD, though we believe that my dad may have been a partisan. And he was taken to the nearest city, which was a small city called Vileka, and he was taken to this prison, which is now a cancer hospital, where he was kept imprisoned in a small cell. His father appeared at the prison every single day with food. He was neither allowed to see my dad or give that food to him. And my dad was actually convicted in accordance with 2 articles of the Russian Criminal Code and sentenced to 13 years hard labour. While this was going on, the Russians began a series of mass deportations, the first being on the 10th of February 1940. The families were dragged from their homes and given a few minutes to pack a few belongings, whatever they could, and a little bit of food. They were given no information about where they were going or how long they'd be taken away for. And those that were diplomats, doctors, politicians, the police, nobility, senior officials, they were arrested separately and segregated, and everybody was going to be deported to what we know as the Gulags. And the Gulags, for me, I always assumed a Gulag was a type of camp. It isn't. A Gulag, or the Gulag, is actually an acronym for the administration of those camps. It basically means the main camp administration, or in full, the main administration of corrective labour camps and labour settlements, although we think of as a Gulag being a specific camp. And these Gulags, these camps, existed all over the Soviet Union, notably Siberia. And when I talk about Siberia, does everybody, or does anybody know, apart from those that have been to this talk before, know what Siberia is? Or was, or is, or where it is? Any ideas what Siberia is? We all know of Siberia. What is it?
It's everywhere to the east of the Ural Mountains, geographically.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So you've got the Ural Mountains. Everybody says it's the definition of cold and